What's your goal right now? What is it that you want to achieve, but somehow feels too heavy to even start? I mean the goals you actually care about. The ones where, if you're honest, you probably already know what to do. And I know this isn't about laziness. Most of the time, it's just that you don't do it consistently. Not because you can't, but because you don't have a method that supports you. So don't assume you're a failure. What you're missing isn't motivation, it's a method. And there is one designed for this exact situation. It comes from Japan, and it works by making change almost unnoticeable. But before we get to it, it helps to understand why habits usually vanish in silence. Most of us know this feeling intimately, right? We've stood at the base of a massive goal, looked up, and felt completely frozen. Not because we don't want it badly enough, but because the distance between where we are and where we think we need to be feels overwhelming. The goal becomes so large that even starting feels pointless. At that point, the mind begins to negotiate. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes when things calm down. And without any conscious decision, inertia takes over. What once felt exciting now feels heavy. That's usually when frustration sets in. You start telling yourself a familiar story. Maybe you lack discipline. Maybe you're just not the kind of person who sticks to things. Maybe other people have some internal strength that you don't. These conclusions feel personal, almost factual, because they've been repeated so many times. But there's something important here that needs to be said clearly. The problem isn't you. This isn't a failure of willpower. It's a failure of method. The all-at-once approach we've been taught to admire is almost designed to backfire. It assumes that change happens through force, through intensity, through a single dramatic decision that carries you forward indefinitely. That idea sounds inspiring, but it collapses the moment it meets real life, with its interruptions, fatigue, and competing demands. Real life doesn't reward constant intensity. It rewards systems that function when motivation is low. The good news is that there is another way to think about change, one that's quieter and far more sustainable. A way that doesn't depend on constant motivation or heroic effort. It starts with thinking small, almost uncomfortably small. This idea comes from Japan, and it's been shaping results for decades. It's called Kaizen, and it sits at the core of what's often referred to as the 1% method. The word Kaizen is usually translated as change for the better or continuous improvement, but that translation barely scratches the surface. What Kaizen really proposes is a different relationship with progress. Instead of betting everything on one massive leap, it asks for tiny, almost invisible improvements made consistently over time. Steps so manageable that they don't provoke resistance. Adjustments so subtle that they feel safe. And safe is important here, because sustainable change doesn't happen when the nervous system is under threat. After World War II, Japan faced the task of rebuilding its industries from the ground up. Resources were limited. Failure was costly. Companies that survived did so not by chasing dramatic breakthroughs, but by refining what already existed. Small process improvements, fewer errors, slight efficiency gains. Each step was barely noticeable. But repeated daily, those 1% gains stacked. Not fast enough to excite, but slow enough to sustain. Over time, accumulation did what breakthroughs couldn't. It changed how work was done. What makes these tiny 1% steps so effective isn't just philosophy or tradition. It's biology. When you attempt a drastic change, your brain interprets it as a threat. Sudden shifts demand energy, uncertainty, and sustained attention. That activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Once that system is engaged, flexibility drops and resistance rises. You don't feel motivated, you feel tense. Under tension, the brain seeks relief, not growth. That's why drastic plans so often collapse into avoidance. Kaizen avoids that reaction almost entirely. The changes are small enough to slip under the radar. The brain stays calm. The rational parts remain engaged. Instead of fighting yourself, you stay curious. You keep going. This is where structure matters. At its core, Kaizen is built on simple feedback loops that keep progress connected to reality. One of the most effective is the PDCA cycle. You begin with a plan, but a deliberately modest one. Not a blueprint for your future self, just a small adjustment you can test in the present. Something specific enough to act on and small enough to repeat. Then you do it. You carry out the action without expecting it to define you or transform your life. It's an experiment, not a commitment. There's no identity attached to the outcome. After that comes the step most people skip: checking. You pause and look at what actually happened. Not how you judged yourself, not whether you felt discipline, but what the action produced. Did it fit into your day? Did it reduce friction or create it? Did it feel sustainable when motivation wasn't high? Only then do you act. Acting doesn't mean pushing harder. It means responding intelligently. If the change worked, it stays. If it didn't, nothing is lost. The experiment did its job. Over time, this loop changes how you think. You stop measuring yourself and start observing systems. Progress becomes iterative instead of emotional. Calm replaces pressure. And because the steps are small, the cycle keeps turning without resistance. To make this practical, take something ordinary. Let's say you want to read more, something like 30 minutes a day. With Kaizen, you'd start small. 5 minutes, for example. After a few days, you check. Did it happen without resistance? Did you skip it less often? If it worked, you act by adding a minute. Not more effort. Just a slightly longer version of the same action. Now think about exercise. Maybe you want to move more. Kaizen begins with 2 minutes of movement. A short walk, a few stretches, just enough to begin. You check again. If it worked, you extend it a little. If it didn't, you adjust the plan instead of blaming yourself. Each example follows the same logic: small action, observation, minor adjustment. Once that rhythm is established, another force begins to work quietly in the background: compounding. A 1% improvement feels insignificant on its own. It barely registers. But consistency changes its meaning. Small gains, repeated daily, don't add up in a straight line. They multiply. The results grow out of proportion with the effort that started them. This is why intensity burns out and consistency endures. Intensity depends on mood. Consistency depends on design. That design extends beyond behavior and into the environment. Most habits don't fail because of laziness. They fail because friction is too high. When spaces are cluttered, tools are hard to reach, and routines are unclear, even simple actions feel heavy. By shaping the environment, you make the desired behavior easier than the alternative. Preparation replaces pressure. Willpower becomes less relevant. Change stops feeling deliberate and starts feeling natural. What once required thought becomes automatic. There's an old metaphor that fits here. Your life is like a garden. Something will always grow there. Neglect doesn't create emptiness. It creates randomness. Small daily actions are how you tend that space. Kaizen is simply the decision to cultivate intentionally, even when progress feels slow. The most powerful shift this philosophy offers is psychological. It removes the demand for perfection. It replaces pressure with permission. Progress becomes enough. Meaningful change rarely announces itself. It accumulates quietly through actions so small they almost seem irrelevant. So forget the dramatic overhaul. Forget the idea that everything has to change at once. Ask a different question. What is one tiny, almost laughably small 1% improvement you could make today? That step won't feel impressive. It won't look transformative. But taken today and repeated tomorrow, it becomes something else entirely. That's where real change begins.